Hey folks, Daniel here and welcome to the channel. Today we are working on Vince's 2019 Mazda Miata MX-5. We are going to exchange the brake fluid and bleed the brake fluid, of course. I'm going to show you how that's done, all up next. Now you may have already bled the brakes before on a car or exchanged brake fluid, and the Miata isn't really much different, but it's always nice to see the details if there are any changes. And if you've never done this before, I like to make my videos detailed enough to give you confidence to be able to do it yourself. Now we're using RVF 600 brake fluid because Vince intends to go to the track every now and then. His regular brake fluid is just fine for autocross, but at the track it's nice to have something a little better. This brake fluid is DOT4 compatible, and the reason we're switching over to RVF 600 is because it has a slightly higher boiling temperature than most other DOT4 brake fluids. However, its downside is it does sort of suck in the moisture from the outside air over time quicker than other brake fluids, so you do need to change it out more often. You see, that's the problem with brake fluid. It needs to be changed at least every 2 to 3 years or a certain mileage depending on what the manual says in your car. And that isn't quite what you want to do with this brake fluid. You should be changing it probably at least every year or after every couple track days. The reason you change your brake fluid is because over time the fluid absorbs moisture from the air. And moisture from the air will affect how high of the boiling point that the brake fluid has. Not only that, but once moisture is in the fluid, it's gonna boil at some temperature before the rest of the brake fluid, which is a hydraulic fluid. When it does that, it turns into a gas. And remember, gases are compressible. So the more gases in your brake fluid means your pedal's gonna be more spongy, and you don't want that. If it's new brake fluid, you're gonna have a nice stiff pedal because there's no gases boiling up. And without water in there, it's not gonna boil until it reaches a very high temperature. So it's important to change your brake fluid often, check its moisture content with a device like this. And then once you've done that, you know that you are set up for the track. So definitely get good pads and good brake fluid, and you'll probably have a great day at the track. Now this isn't the only procedure we're doing on his car today. We're also changing out the front brake pads and rotors and the rear brake pads, as well as putting in new seat rails to lower his seat. So when those videos are available, I'll have links at the end of this video and probably up here somewhere. All right, let's get to swapping out the brake fluid and bleeding the brakes on the Mazda Miata MX-5 ND2. For this procedure, you'll need the following tools. First, you'll definitely want a rag or some paper towels available to clean up spilled brake fluid. You'll also want a way to bleed the brakes, and I'm using the Motive Products Power Brake Bleeder. This thing is so great, it makes things easy. It just pressurizes the fluid into the brake reservoir, which then pushes the fluid all the way out to the brake bleeder, and you can do it all by yourself. Make sure you get the right attachment for your brake reservoir. This one is designed for most GM cars and also happens to fit the Miata, but yours may be different. This is the 108 attachment. You'll also need an open end wrench for your brake bleeders, or preferably a flare nut wrench. Generally 8 to 10 millimeters, it's 10 millimeters on the Miata. Lastly, to collect all the old fluid, you'll need a catch bottle like this. Motive has one, but we used Vince's that comes from Genesis. He got it off Amazon. Besides that, you'll need the necessary tools to jack up and support the vehicle, as well as remove the wheels. I suggest jacking up the whole car, get all the wheels off to make the process simpler. Okay, to get started, I do suggest you suck out some of the fluid that's in the reservoir. This just helps make sure that we're not pushing old dirty fluid through the whole system, but it's not totally necessary. Make sure you clean up any spilled brake fluid. It can be pretty bad on your paint and some other plastics. Now connect the adapter to the pressure bleeder. Use a little Teflon tape to make sure that the brass fitting doesn't leak. Put the adapter on your reservoir, and then pump up the brake bleeder to about 15 psi to see if there's any leaks. Just listen carefully. If you hear any air passing, address the leaks. If everything's good, go ahead and release the pressure by unscrewing the cap on the pressure bottle. Now you can put fluid in the pressure bottle. I suggest putting in at least 2 quarts. On my Cadillac and the Miata, we both only used about 1.5 quarts to do the brake bleeding process. If you have a big truck or something, maybe you need more, so consider that. But no matter what, you want to make sure that this thing doesn't go empty while you're working on it. Now screw the cap back on and pressurize the vessel to about 15 psi. It's easy to see the 15 psi because it's right there at the 12 o'clock position. With all that pressure in there, it's pushing fluid up through the line into your reservoir, which puts pressure through the brake lines of the car right up to the brake bleeders where we're gonna let the fluid out. Now you have 4 brakes, and the recommended procedure is to start with the one farthest from the reservoir, in this case, the passenger rear. But that's not always the case as far as which one's closer or farther away. Also, manufacturers may have a specific order they prefer you to do, so check with your service manual or maybe on your Facebook or car forum groups. Although we're going to start with the rear passenger, I want to give you an example here on the front caliper. Notice the brake caliper, the brake line, and the brake bleeder screw. The fluid comes through the line and comes out the bleeder screw. So let's attach our catch can hose to the bleeder. Now you can hang the catch can on the caliper, or you can set it on the ground, but I guarantee you're gonna knock it over. Next, take your 10mm wrench, or whatever size your bleeders are, and crack open the bleeder. When I say that, I don't mean crack it off, I just mean unscrew it slightly so that fluid starts to come out. It may be difficult at first, but then it will break free. Make sure you're not turning it the wrong way. When you tighten these, you can break those bleeders off. They're soft metal, so be really careful because that's gonna give you a whole new set of problems. Once you crack it open, fluid will start to come out. Maybe bubbles will come out first. Once the bubbles stop, you're done with the bleeding process. But if you're exchanging the brake fluid, you've got to keep letting the fluid come out until the dirty fluid stops flowing out and you start seeing cleaner fluid. Vince's car is only about a year old, so the brake fluid isn't really that bad. It looks clear in the lines until you look down in the catch can and you can see it's definitely darker than the fluid that we just poured out of the new bottles. Keep bleeding for a while. Remember, those brake lines are pretty long going from the rear wheel up to the reservoir, so this may take a little time. We're actually going to do at least half a quart to ensure that we get it all out. Once you're confident that all the bubbles are out and you've bled that line, close the brake bleeder. Remember, don't over tighten it, but make sure it's not leaking after you've taken off the hose. And again, be sure to clean up any spilled brake fluid. Throughout this process, and definitely between calipers, make sure the brake bleeder is pumped up to that 15 psi. Next, we've moved on to the second farthest caliper. That is the driver's rear. It's the same process. Connect the hose, open the bleeder, let the bubbles out, or release all the fluid you can. We're gonna do almost another half a quart out of this one because the brake lines are pretty long. This motive brake bleeder is making the process so easy. Vince can do this all by himself, otherwise he might need somebody to help him. Basically, somebody presses on the brake pedal, and then he cracks open the bleeder, and then he closes the bleeder, then they have to lift their foot off the brake pedal, and then repeat. And it's this little dance that has to be done, and it takes 2 people, and it's kind of a pain. And the next closest to the reservoir is the passenger front. Connect the hose, open the bleeder, and let the bubbles and fluid out. Notice our catch can is pretty full. That's okay, we're gonna dump some out into the RBF bottles that we just emptied, and later we can recycle all the brake fluid in those bottles at our local auto parts store. All right, on to the last caliper, the one closest to the reservoir. Repeat the process and you'll be done. We actually went back to the farthest one again just to double check and make sure that we got all the fluid and that it was nice clean stuff coming out. You don't have to do that, of course, but we just wanted to make sure. Now release the pressure from the brake bleeder by unscrewing the large cap on the pressure vessel. Once the air is released, unscrew the cap from the reservoir and let the fluid drain back into the pressure vessel. Pour any unused brake fluid back into the bottles and recycle at the auto parts store. Don't use this brake fluid anymore. Once it's opened, it's just collecting moisture. So start with a fresh bottle if you ever need to add brake fluid. Make sure your reservoir is topped off to the full mark. If not, just pour a little in there and then make sure to replace the cap.
All right, that's it to bleeding the brakes on the Mazda Miata MX-5 ND2. It's probably very similar on most Miatas, honestly. The procedure is very basic among cars.
That motive brake bleeder was so helpful. It was the first time I used it and it's better than other systems I've used, so I really like how it works and no problem to bleed your brakes all by yourself. Alright folks, well that's it for this. I hope that you are now confident to bleed your own brakes. If you are, please hit the like button. It helps this video get views, and subscribe, and of course hit the bell to be notified when my next Miata mod video comes out. Today we did a couple things actually. We changed the brake rotors up front and the brake pads all around, and we're going to install a seat lowering kit, so be sure to look for those videos. Alright, thanks for watching the Jet Fuel Only channel. We'll see you next time.